So you want to launch a podcast, but you're not sure where to start? You've come to the right place. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of podcasting, my first question to you is, do you want to DIY your podcast or hire help like a podcast manager or a podcast editor? Because ultimately, both require your time and energy, but in very different ways. Okay, let's get into it. Hi, I'm Alexis, a podcast manager, here to guide you toward podcasting success. And today we're going to break it down. If you don't mind teaching yourself how to do all the things and you want to learn how to set up your own podcast, then I say DIY is the way to go. I've created a checklist of all the things you need to launch your podcast, including software and equipment recommendations with a few recording tips sprinkled in. I also have a pro tip. If you want to DIY your podcast, maybe consider scheduling a free 15-minute call with a podcast manager or even an hour-long strategy call to come up with a game plan for how you're going to tackle your podcast launch solo. There, you can ask all of your questions and ultimately spend less time on trying to figure out exactly what you need and get your podcast up and running sooner. In fact, I did that here recently with a guy who wanted to launch his podcast, but he wasn't sure if he wanted to commit to working with a podcast manager or a podcast editor. And that's totally fine. I gave him some direction on what he needed to focus on, what equipment and software he could use, a doable uploading schedule for him based on his goals, and this is what he had to say about it. But if you are going to DIY it, make sure you purchase the right equipment for the area you plan to record in. Get your host site set up and design your cover art in a way so people know exactly what your podcast is about. Like I said, I have a whole checklist with all of this on there, so be sure to download my pod launch checklist freebie in the description below. If you know right off the bat that you want to hire help, then the first thing to consider is your budget. What does that look like for you? Finding the right budget is something to keep in mind when looking for the right person to help you. What they can help with and what is their turnaround time are things that you can factor into the final price. And I'm speaking from a podcast manager perspective because I'm more familiar with that realm. But you'll find that the range to launch a podcast can go anywhere from $800 to $2,000. And that's with the help of a podcast manager. The services I offer when launching a podcast are strategizing and creating a step-by-step launch plan over a 6 to 8 week period. During that time, we'll get you set up on a hosting platform where the podcast will live, find you a fancy new theme song we'll use for your intro and outro. We'll plan out the first 3 episodes of your podcast and your trailer. I like to launch with 3 episodes so it gives your listeners something to binge listen to when you've officially launched. 3 episodes isn't necessary, but I'd recommend it if you have the bandwidth. If not, you can launch with 1 episode and still be okay. Then we'll get you to record those 3 episodes and trailer and send over to your podcast manager where they or I edit and schedule them for launch day. I then submit your podcast to platforms like Apple and Spotify, so when people search for you, your podcast pops up. I'll create promotional graphics needed to promote each episode, so for example, my clients, that usually includes short form video like Reels or YouTube Shorts, and then I'll write the show notes for each episode and schedule those in the host platform and website if you have one, and coach you along the way, give you feedback, share recording tips, best practices, things like that. I even help my clients pick the right equipment needed when they get started. And my total for a launch starts at $2,200. Now remember, this is for a podcast manager who is taking on the entire launch and all you have to do is record. An editor can cost you much less since their only focus is editing the raw audio and giving you the final edited version, but you'll be responsible for everything else. Now, maybe you don't want to outsource all the things, but there are certain tasks you could do without, like audio and video editing. Maybe the show notes aren't your thing. Maybe you don't like the organizing of the entire podcast in a project management system. Things like that. You can outsource that to somebody to help you. I'll be sharing more tips like this in my email newsletter. A link to sign up for that is down below, and I'll see you in the next video.